Before diving into the crux of the chapter, the authors give us three things to keep in mind. The first one is to really examine. When you are creating an argument or when you're receiving an argument, really be examining what are your own beliefs and biases, where is your confirmation bias lie, what is your background that you're bringing to bear on the reading of whatever you're looking into. And you'll want to do this when you look at the rhetorical analysis assignment. Make sure you're checking where your own stuff is coming in. And if you're constructing an argument, really making sure that you're putting out there something that is true. When you are receiving an argument, you also want to make sure you're fact checking, that you're really going into, so where do these facts come from? What do they really mean? And we're going to get into some examples of that in the chapter. And then they say to not give up on facts, right? Although it seems like with things, especially online, there's a lot of things getting blurred that we took for granted as true. It's not all up in the air. It's not all open for debate. Like the Earth, it's round. It's not flat. It's perfectly round, right? It's some kind of shape. It's definitely not flat, though. Let's just put that out there right away. So if someone's on Twitter talking about flat Earth, or if you've got someone in your circle talking about flat Earth, just block. Just no. We're not accepting that. Someone says, this is International Holocaust Remembrance Day just happened. Someone says, well, the Holocaust didn't really occur. Nope, we're not. That's not true. That's not happening. We're not going to give voice and air and breath to facts that are facts and people are contradicting them, right? That's what we're not going to give the air to, is the contradiction of things that really are true, or the replacement of true facts with false ones, right? There's not time for that. There's not room for that. We have to just be strong in knowing that some things just are true, because the other issues have so many layers and so many nuances and so much complexity. That's where we need to spend our time, right? Is diving into those things. The authors bring up immigration quite a bit as a current issue as it is, and talking about different facets of it. That's a perfect example where here we don't have a one bright line, this should be the law approach available to us, which is what makes it so difficult, right? And so this is an area where we do have to sort of dive in a little bit and see, what facts exist and how can we use them to make informed decisions. And here's where we're going to say, there's no truth in the idea that all immigrants are bad people. There's no truth in the idea that all immigrants are good people. We really have to dive in a little bit more into what our policies should be and why. So that's where our time needs to be spent, not on allowing light and air on statements of fact that are not that are just patently untrue, right? So don't even ever let yourself get dragged into arguments about things that are clearly settled. Let's move on from those and really focus on the things that are more complex and we have to unravel and figure out. So the book gives us some Aristotle, which is always great to have in our lives. We like Aristotle. Again, what makes rhetoric so fascinating is, right, it's such an ancient tradition, such an ancient topic, but yet so incredibly relevant today. Some might argue more now than ever, or at least as much as ever. So Aristotle comes to us and says, look, there's two kinds of basic proofs within logic and logos, right? There are artistic proofs and inartistic proofs. Artistic proofs are kind of what they sound like, right? When you think of artistic, you think of something somebody is creating, and that's what artistic proofs are. They are arguments where the speaker sort of constructs the argument based on logic and reasoning and sort of drawing conclusions, drawing things together, making analogies, that sort of thing. And then we have inartistic proofs, which are arguments based on what the author of the argument is given, right? Facts, statistics, we might call hard evidence. That's an inartistic proof, right? So within logos, you can make some inartistic proof-based appeals where you're saying, look at the facts, look at the statistics, look at the survey. Or you can make artistic-based appeals where you're saying, well, just think about it. Doesn't it make sense that it would be this way? And there's nothing inherently wrong with either one. the fact-based appeals, you still have to really think very critically about them, as we'll discuss. And the artistic appeals, sometimes we just need that, right? We just need, just think about it, common sense, link the things together. There's not necessarily a specific proof that exists about a thing. Just think about it, and we'll give an example in a few minutes. So we get this idea that there are artistic proofs and inartistic proofs. And then they dive into sort of breaking some of these down. So one of the first things that's discussed are facts, right? And they say that gathering factual information and transmitting it faithfully is basically what professional scholarship and professional journalism is all about, right? That's what media really is all about when we think about, at least on a professional level, what is intended to take place. That we take information in and we make sure that it's verified, and then we transmit it factually, right? So reading the gossip columns, we might ask, well, where did that information come from? And how did the author sort of translate it from that source to us to bring it to light? If you have a low stakes argument, the authors point out that in that situation, your argument may be able to stand just on facts alone, right? You might just be able to say, well, hey, I read it in the Wall Street Journal. And that might just be enough to convince the person you're talking to that you know what you're talking about. If it's a scholarly argument, we're going to always need a lot more evidence. And that's why reading a scholarly paper, even in a topic that you're really interested in, it can feel dry and boring and just not as full of life. And yet it has to be that way because we're making a dispassionate analysis of facts. We are looking at research and empirical studies and trying to see, what do they conclude? How can we parse all of that out to reach a conclusion that fits within the body of work in this field so far? It's important to have this, though. We need that scholarly arena for information to be carefully vetted, to have peers reviewing other people in their own field, making sure that they're doing things correctly, that they're doing things according to industry standards, and to have people engaging in these topics relatively dispassionately. And this is almost an antidote to the sort of clickbait and headlines and things that get shared and go viral and whatnot. And that stuff might be important too, but if it was the only thing that existed and we didn't have the scholarly research and leadership almost, we would have potentially a lot less of an understanding of a lot of things. And sometimes the viral stuff can help us understand the scholarly stuff more. But even then, there's a responsibility on the creator of the viral content to be faithful and true to that original scholarly work. But this is why, someone will do a study that showed that among, 5 participants, 4 of them ate lima beans during the study, and by the end, their eyesight had improved 1 degree. That might turn into a headline in Health Magazine that says, eat lima beans and see 20 times better, right? We see this happen all the time. So it's something to think about is the responsibility that you have of how you treat facts depending on the genre or the medium in which you're writing, and how much responsibility does the writer in the thing you're reading have to maintaining facts and getting them from appropriate sources. We also look at the idea of statistics, right? Statistics are used a ton in lots of kinds of arguments. For instance, I recently read that 98% of cats will try to eat your hair while you're talking on a lecture video. And we can look at the authors pointing out the idea that statistics can often be distrusted because there is sort of a perception that you can make statistics mean whatever you want them to mean. And I think that is a fair criticism that people have. I don't think it's fair to dismiss all statistics as inherently untrustworthy, but it's really important if you receive a statistic to think about, well, where did it come from? Who interpreted it this way? Can I see the original source? And that sort of thing. So being able to carefully parse and read statistical information is really important because it can tell us a lot of things, but it can also, statistics be misleading. So make sure you understand if you're reading a statistic, where did it come from? What's the date of the information? How was the information gathered? And so on. And the authors do a good job of talking through that CNN issue with the gun violence reporting, right? And that was really important. And misusing statistics can actually hurt your own cause, right? So if you're trying to advocate for the fact that no one should be able to own cats, and you erroneously cite some sort of statistic that is not true, you might make yourself then look less credible, and that hurts your ability to make ethos-based appeals. So in addition to statistics, what we often see is survey and poll data. I read one today, and it said something like, half of all Americans think that women should be required by law to take their husband's last name in marriage. 50% of all Americans? Really? Maybe I just don't know enough of those Americans to make that believable to me. But I looked into it a tiny bit just for a minute, and the first thing I noticed was that the survey was only of 1,200 people. 1,200 people is a very small sample size to then extrapolate to the entire country of however millions of people we have here. So that's one thing that's really should be sort of a little bit of a reason to take pause when you're taking in survey or poll data, is if the sample size is very small, right? That's one thing that should influence your evaluation of that kind of information. Polls and surveys are not inherently, just like statistics, not inherently unreliable. In fact, they can tell us things that would be really hard to gather elsewhere. Things about attitudes, perceptions, behaviors, choices, things that we can't accurately gather in any other kind of quantifiable way. So one other thing to pay attention to is not just what was the sample size of a survey, who commissioned the survey, who did the actual survey, do we have a sense of who they surveyed, or how they put the survey out, right? If you put out a survey only to people who own landline telephones, your sample is already going to be very different than if you put out a survey where people could respond through text message, right? Because there are population differences between people who own landlines and people who have access to text messages. And I'm sure there's Venn diagram overlap between the two, but there's also some really big differences. The other thing to pay attention to is how the questions were worded. What did the surveyor actually ask, right? So if we're thinking about this poll about you should be required by law to take your husband's name when you marry, how was that actually asked? Was it, hey, can I have this moment of your time? I'm calling with a quick survey. What do you think about a law that women would have to take their husband's last name? Sound good or what? Right? That might be one way of phrasing it. Or it might have been, would you be upset if we had such a law? Or would you be angry if we had such a law? And if someone says no, then that's interpreted as supportive, right? We don't know what the actual questions were. So here's an example. I could give a survey to you guys right now. I say, please answer the following. How amazing am I as a faculty member? Would you say super amazing or just regular amazing? You answer that. So say I forced you to answer that, and you have to only pick one of those. So each of you press A or B, and I get those results, and I go to my department chair, and I say, look, everyone in my class thinks I'm amazing. True that you each clicked some degree of amazing, but you had no other choice. There were no other choice options available. And so it's important to know what was asked to result in those survey results. And then we have testimonies and narratives, right? This is where people say, I've had this experience, and I'm going to share my experience with you as a fact in itself. Now, remember in the ethos chapter, we talked about testimonies as also being credibility, right? You can gain credibility by saying, I have been there. I've had this experience. So the appeals can come from the same type of thing, right? Me saying I've been there and have experience serves to support my credibility in this arena, and the actual words that I say in that testimony serve as facts, serve as factual logos-based support for me saying what my experience was. So when we look at sort of, human testimony, this is something that a lot of us rely on all the time, right? You might rely on it when you're making a decision about whether to go see a certain movie, right? Your friend might say, oh, I saw that movie and it was amazing and I sat there and I cried and it was beautiful. You might say, oh, wow, if that person had that type of reaction and they're explaining that this was their experience, I want to have that experience too, so I'm going to go see it because I think that I'm going to have the same experience they had based on their testimony, based on how they explained it. And as the book notes, testimony is used in court cases as evidence all the time, right? The classic idea of, interviewing the neighbor who was at home in the apartment building when the crime occurred, and they describe the noises they heard and the sounds they heard and the person they saw running by through the peephole. That testimony, that narrative is taken as evidence in support of convicting that person for the crime. So again, just like surveys, just like statistics, not inherently untrustworthy, but also worth sort of looking at the credibility. An example of how testimony can be used in a logos-based appeal is the link reading on page 657, John McWhorter's Thick of Tongue, right, where he describes his experience as being an African-American man who's called articulate in how he describes feeling with respect to that word. So that's an example of what that testimony or narrative can look like. So we have these sort of more hard fact-based appeals, right? Either facts, statistics, survey data, poll data, testimony, narratives. Those are sort of the hard facts, these inartistic proofs, these things that are given to the speaker as support that he or she can use in favor of their position. Then we also have the artistic proofs, the logic and the reasoning, thus, connect the dots, common sense, come on, think it through, which again, not inherently unreliable, and again, worthy of exploration and of digging into a little bit. So one type of approach here is the syllogism, right? We get that from our friend Aristotle as well. And so there's an example. All human beings are mortal, right? So true. Socrates is a human being. True. Therefore, Socrates is mortal, right? So you get to this conclusion that Socrates is mortal based on the fact that he's a human being and that you know that all human beings are mortal. And we're going to dig into some of this kind of reasoning later in the semester when we look at Toulmin logic. So that's one type of reason and common sense, right? None of those, the ultimate fact that Socrates is mortal isn't provided as sort of a fact. It's coming to us as reasoning out from the two previous facts. It's a fact that Socrates is a human. It's a fact that all humans are mortal. Therefore, Socrates must be mortal. We also, within this area of artistic proofs, of sort of logic and reasoning, look at what is called an enthymeme. Here is where we are sort of condensing and collapsing an argument based on shared common understandings of just how things work. These are a little bit difficult if you're trying to communicate across cultures, because there may be some shared assumptions that you have with people in your own culture that don't exist with people from other cultures. And it's always worth looking at someone who's using an enthymeme, who's collapsing an argument, to make sure that all of their underlying assumptions really do hold out, really do bear truth in the end. And later in the semester, we're going to talk about breaking down some of these kinds of arguments. But an example of an enthymeme is, oh, it's raining, so we need to cancel the picnic, right? that seems to require no digging whatsoever, right? It's raining, so we have to cancel the picnic. Of course, why wouldn't we? However, we can really pull that apart a little bit, right? It's raining, so we better cancel the picnic. So this means that we're assuming that picnics take place outdoors, right? Otherwise, what would the rain have to do with it? So that we could expand that by saying it's raining and we have a picnic planned. Picnics are usually outdoors, therefore we should cancel it so we don't get wet. We're also assuming that picnics under the rain are not ideal, that that's not something we want to do, that we don't routinely gather under giant umbrellas and have picnics together, right? So it's raining. Usually when it's raining, people don't have picnics because it's uncomfortable. Picnics are held outdoors, therefore we should cancel the picnic. You can kind of start pulling all of those things out, right? So you could actually say, pull it out more, and on page 73 at the bottom, right? They say, we'd better cancel the picnic this afternoon because the Weather Bureau is predicting a 70% chance of rain for the remainder of the day, right? So that's pulling out the weather part of it a little bit. And then again, we break it down into its little parts, right? Picnics are usually held outdoors. When the weather is bad, it's best to cancel picnics. Rain is bad weather for picnics. A 70% chance of rain means rain is more likely to occur than not. When rain is more likely to occur than not, it makes sense to cancel a picnic. We wouldn't usually go to that level, right? Your friends would probably think something was a little wrong with you if you went to them instead of saying, hey, it's going to rain, we should cancel the picnic. You went through this whole list of rain is customarily bad for picnics because picnics are held outdoors and so on. In this class, however, we overthink everything, right? So we're going to overthink these enthymons. We're going to dig into, well, what is the common understanding that we share that allows us to collapse this argument? And if we see someone collapsing an argument, are they basing on a true understanding that is shared, or are they skipping over some steps and ending up with a bad conclusion, right? As we saw in the penguin cartoon earlier on the previous page, logic can sound really good, but when you actually tease it out and lay it all out on the table, it's actually not good, right? That can totally happen. When we're thinking about arguments and sort of how we make them, it's helpful to think about sort of the different structures that a logical argument might take or might use in order to form itself. So one of those structures is degree, right? Arguments based on degree are incredibly familiar, right? If I say, oh, I bought this milk, or you should buy this milk because it's 20% off. I mean, that sounds great, right? 20% off means you're going to pay less. The same milk for less money sounds great. That's an argument based on degree. Or you should go to this particular store because they're going to give you a free wallet with your purchase. Oh, free wallet, that's more. That's an extra thing that I get on top of my purchase. That sounds good. More is good, right? It's tempting to think more of good stuff is good and less of bad stuff is good. More of bad stuff is bad, less of good stuff is bad, right? We have to be careful not to oversimplify, and they give some examples. But logical arguments based on degree can be helpful, can be convincing, are commonly used, and again, call for critical thinking. We also have analogies, right? Comparing things to make sense of something. So usually we might use an analogy to compare something that we don't know much about to something that we know a lot about in order to educate us about the first thing. So an example is there was some kind of business where you could borrow designer purses and then return them when you're done using them. And it was described in a pitch as Netflix for purses. So instead of saying how the purse swap works and explain the mechanics of it as a way of telling someone how it works, you just shorthand it into, it's Netflix for purses. Oh, so easy, because especially that's when Netflix used to deliver DVDs instead of only be streaming. And it just, you already knew Netflix. If someone said Netflix, you thought, oh, the company that you sign up for account, they send, you put which DVDs you want. They send you however many you have with your current package. You watch them as much as you want, and then you return them and send them back, and then they'll send you the next thing on your list, and that's how it works. Saying Netflix for Purses transfers that understanding of that model onto this new model that you've just introduced to. You explain so much less about the purse thing when all you have to do is say, it's like Netflix for purses. Oh, okay, that makes sense. So analogies can be really helpful, especially when you're talking to an audience who's less familiar with the thing you're talking about or your approach, but you can give it a comparison to something that they are familiar with. Again, as long as the analogy makes sense, bears truth, etc. And then we can have logos-based appeals based in the idea of precedent as a logical structure, right? Where we say, well, this thing happened before, based on something that you already know what's the current state of it. Precedent is used all the time in legal cases. In fact, it's sort of accepted that you need to follow precedent. So it's so common to say, well, we decided this way in this particular case, and so we're going to decide a very similar way in this case. Or we decided this way in this particular case. The facts of the current case are different, so we're going to come to a different result. So an example, I was reading recently about slip and fall cases in Michigan. I was really curious with all this ice and snow about, liability if someone slips on your sidewalk. And so there's this case where someone slipped and fell on a sidewalk, and they sued the store or whatever it was where they slipped. And the court said, hey, this guy is from Michigan. He knows it's going to snow, and he knows that likely under the snow will be ice. Excuse me. And he even put on the right kind of shoes to be wearing on slippery days, so he knew he was going to encounter ice. So we just think that there's really no case here. I mean, they said it in a legal way, but that's what they said. So a future time, if someone slips and falls on a winter day and they're from Michigan too, the courts will say, well, in this case, we decided they had no case, and this person's situation is quite similar. So based on that precedent, we're going to decide in the same way. Or the facts might be totally different, and they'll say, well, we can't decide that same way because now everything is different. So based on that precedent, we went one way based on those facts. We're going to go the other way because these are different facts. Sorry if that's confusing. But precedent is basically using comparison to things past in order to understand things present. And where things are going. So the idea of Disney's Moana, right, that linked reading, where they went through and they said, look at all the times where Disney got it wrong. Comparing to those, Disney's kind of getting closer to getting it right in terms of appropriately representing other cultures. So that's logos, right? That's logos. We have appeals based in the inartistic appeals, where the arguer is using things given to them to make their point, whether those things are statistics, testimonies, witness statements, poll data, surveys, just information, and making sure that we are receiving information without confirmation bias, making sure we're checking their confirmation bias. And then there are the artistic appeals, right? The appeals based in logic and reasoning, the common sense that just think about it. And this is where we're looking at things like, are we using analogies? We're using precedent. Are we using syllogism? Are we using enthymemes? Are we using, these other tools and structures for arguments, analogies, and so on? So my suggestion for sort of digesting this chapter is really to have taken notes this whole time. If you didn't, go back and start jotting them down. Outline the chapter. Outlining, I want to teach it to you because it's such a helpful tool if you don't already use it. I think there's an example of how it can work in the syllabus. If I still included the image, I'll have to check. But even if not, outlining is just basically kind of what it sounds like if you made an outline of the book. If you took the table of contents, that's the beginning of an outline. So outlining the chapter is quite similar, right? Use a Roman numeral 1 and a bold heading for each of the main sections of a chapter, and then bullet point out underneath of that sort of the main takeaways and the main points, and underline or highlight or italicize any vocabulary terms. That process of outlining is instrumental in really digesting the information, and scientifically doing that in handwriting without typing is proven to actually help you retain the information and to remember it. Hopefully my saying that just made you say, what do you mean proven, and by whom, and where is this information, and how do you know? I hope that this chapter taught you to do that. We're going to have a discussion board on this, and we're also going to have a quick quiz on all of this stuff when we come back to class, because I just want to make sure that we really can move on and move forward. If there's parts of this concepts that just went over your head or didn't stick or aren't clear, I really want you to ask, but I also want to know, because if we need to go back and spend any more time on any of this, I want to before we move forward, because this stuff is just really important. I want to talk about the rhetorical analysis assignment, since we really have started it, but we haven't gotten a chance to talk about it together very much. The first step is to read the article you've been assigned. So I had asked everyone to rank of those article options that are in the assignment document, your top 3 choices, and I think there were 5 available options, and everyone who did that, I tried to give you as close to your first preference as I could. And then everyone who didn't do that, I just gave you what worked out in the shake of things. So all the topics I think are interesting. They're certainly quite different in terms of the sources and all of that. And we're going to read for next week what a rhetorical analysis really is and how it functions and works, so that you can understand what's really going to be expected of you. But I don't want you to wait until then to get started. What I want you to do right now is read through the article you've been assigned. Just read through it once so you've read it and kind of taken it in, and then read it again and start sort of taking notes based on what we've already read about pathos and ethos and logos, right? Maybe make, an L, an E, and a P when you see the author using those appeals, right? Where are you seeing appeals based in an appeal to authority, based in credibility? Are they citing particular sources? Are they talking about, well, I have come from the situation? Are they trying to sort of reach out to you in a specific way? Are they using pathos anywhere? Are they trying to build bridges, or are they trying to build up their argument? Are they doing things like repeating sounds or repeating words within a sentence structure? Are they using words, phrases, terms, images to pull on your heartstrings in any particular way, make you afraid, make you angry, make you sad, make you fearful of something happening to others? What emotions are they really going for? And then now that we've explored logos, what appeals to logical reasoning are they using? Are they making analogies? Are they appealing to precedent? Are they looking at sort of what they've been through as evidence of something? Are they looking at facts, information, statistics, polls, surveys, all that kind of stuff? Start making some notes and be thinking, does it work? Is it effective? Am I pulled in by the emotional appeals? Am I convinced by the appeals to credibility and authority? Do I believe these facts? Do they make sense? Is the logic sound? That's what a rhetorical analysis is. It's looking at the work of another person and really analyzing the argument for effectiveness through the lens of all of the components of what rhetoric is. So we're going to talk more about it, but again, I don't want you holding off on starting the initial process, because you can start now. You have the tools available to get started. You'll read the article, you'll read it again, and you'll start taking notes. Do you see logos? Do you see ethos? Do you see pathos? The rhetorical analysis is more than looking for those 3 things, but it's a start. So we're going to do that. So please do the reading. Please participate in the discussion board, and please start on that rhetorical analysis through doing what I just mentioned. And, hopefully we'll be able to see each other sometime soon. Stay warm, stay safe, and all the things. Keep reading things that you read and coming across things that you come across, but start looking at all of that stuff critically within the lens of your renewed understanding that you're receiving of what it really means to think critically about the world around us. So I will see you all on Monday, right? Fingers crossed, hopefully. See you then.